And welcome back. The Human Sciences Research Council has published a new study on human trafficking in South Africa, which is now available nationwide. The author, Professor Philip Frankel, has worked on trafficking issues for over a decade and also authored only other book on this subject in South Africa, that is The Long Walk to Nowhere, Human Trafficking Post-Mandela South Africa, which came out in 2017. The new book, Human Trafficking in South Africa, is an update of the earlier work, and we are now joined by the professor via Zoom, Professor Philip Frankel, now joining us. Professor, thank you so much for making time for us. First of all, some of the key highlights that have come out of this recent study.
Well, I think one of the things, certainly one of the most important things, is that we have a major human trafficking problem in this country. It's far larger than many people suspect. Unfortunately, we don't know with exactitude how big it is, but we suspect there might be well over 200,000 victims in the country. That's the first major finding. The second major finding is that trafficking takes all kinds of different forms, at least 16 different forms, from sex trafficking through child trafficking, and in particular labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is probably the largest form of trafficking in South Africa at the moment. In fact, labor trafficking is the largest form of trafficking anywhere. And the third point which I'd emphasize here is that the situation is not getting better. There is a world evaluation whose results have just come out in the course of the last few weeks, and it shows that South Africa has not improved and relative to many other countries is actually worsened.
Yeah. Does the report also look into what could have landed South Africa becoming a fertile ground for human trafficking? Where do we find some of the lapses, and could it all be a lack of intelligence or even law enforcement?
Well, the point is that the information is very difficult to access. Law enforcement, South African police does have information. It tends to be a little reluctant to release the information, and the other issue is that a lot of that information is, we suspect, inaccurate. Yeah. It's either inflated because the police want to be seen to be doing their job, or it's deflated because the police are under the impression, and sometimes, some cases correctly, that the project, the problem isn't necessarily there. So it's very, very hard to get information, and that's why in the last analysis, as I said, we only have estimates, we don't have accurate figures.
Yeah. And does South Africa become, or is South Africa rather more vulnerable as a host country for children or people who have been trafficked, or is it the case of trafficking children or people through South Africa where the problem lies?
Well, look, the problem lies in many different things. Firstly, South Africa is at the center of a huge system of migration which encompasses the whole region. There are people constantly coming inside and outside Africa, or South Africa. There are many people, we don't know again exact figures, but who are undocumented migrants. There are people coming into South Africa from overseas. There are people coming from South Africa into the markets overseas. And of course, within the country, there's enormous trafficking internally from the rural areas to the urban areas. So you've got trafficking ongoing on a multi-dimensional basis.
Yeah. And a final one is looking at one of the sections that you have in the book that specifically focuses on sex trafficking. Does this report at all look at what could happen if South Africa was to decriminalize sex work? Some experts have said that if sex work is to be decriminalized in South Africa, we could see an increase in sex trafficking. Does your report speak to that at all?
It does. It does. It's one of the first articles which looks at this in detail. I think that decriminalizing sex trafficking in South Africa will be a complete disaster. And the reason I say that is because although there is a need in some respects to decriminalize it, you can't do this effectively unless you've got effective governance, and unless you've got effective social services and police law reinforcement. So I'm opposed to the whole idea of decriminalization at this point. I think it's going to do immense harm to people who are victims of sex trafficking and to a variety of others who are involved in various other ways.
Well, it should be an interesting conversation and looking into the book. All the best with the launch as well. That is Professor Philip Frankel.